Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this regularly scheduled Intergovernmental Relations Committee. I'm the committee chair, Councilmember Andrew Johnson. I'm joined today by my colleagues, Council President Bender, Reich, Vice President Jenkins, and Schrader. We are a quorum of this committee, and today we have 5 items on consent, and we are also receiving our updates on the various legislative items. So I will go ahead and read through these consent items. We have a contract amending our federal representation services with Faegre Baker Daniels. We have a contract amending our state legislative services with Franzen Law and Policy Group, a contract amending our agreement with Fredericks and Byron as well, and we have item number 4, a state legislative agenda amendment. 2 specific components of that are technical language clarification and inserting language in support of ending the practice of suspending or revoking driver's licenses of individuals for non-public safety-related offenses and non-payment of fines and fees. And then an amendment of our state policy positions by just inserting some clarifying language. So we left those items on consent because we figured they were all fairly minor. Do I have any questions from committee members? Any discussion of those items? All right, seeing none, I'll go ahead and move all 5 items. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
The motion carries. Those items are approved. And with that, we have today Mr. Ranieri from our Intergovernmental Relations Department to give us an update. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Gene Ranieri. I'm the Director of Government Relations, and I'm pitch hitting for all of my staff because they're all at the Capitol on hearings. There are several hearings going on right now, and we can talk about those in a few minutes. I'd like to talk a little bit about the federal and state government today, and one is about the federal. There was a shutdown. It was 3 days, and I think it was 2 days ago. It ended, and there will be now was part of the agreement was a continuing resolution. And a continuing resolution is basically Congress passes a resolution that will fund the federal government at either the same level as last year or the prior year or close to with some changes. So that's what we have. We have a continuing resolution for fiscal year 2018, which ends on September 30th of this year till February 6th. After February 6th, hopefully there will be a bill, a resolution, either a continuing resolution or possibly an omnibus appropriations bill. We haven't had a federal omnibus appropriations bill in 6 years. We've been operating on either continuing resolutions or partial appropriations. So hopefully something will happen. The big stumbling blocks, as you've all know, been reading in the papers and on media, disaster relief, DACA, level of domestic and military spending, and border security. All those issues are still on the table. They will probably be discussed before February 6th. And if we can get everything done February 6th, at least we'll have hopefully funding until the end of the year, or it could be even shorter, and that could be the other option. Other issues that our city receives about $30 million a year in federal funds. It did not have any interruption at all in such a short term. Most of the payment systems that the federal government had were still up and running. But if it goes longer, there could be an impact. We could see there's another possibility of a 2-year budget. It could be that the Senate and House agree to fiscal 18 and fiscal 19, but I think that's pretty aggressive and pretty optimistic. But that's where we are at the federal level. The other issues at the federal level that we are watching and are concerned about, one is the whole issue of opioids. There's an opioid crisis in the country. The president has declared an emergency at least 2 times, but we have not seen any legislation or federal funding. Some activities should be coming in the next couple of weeks, and we'll keep you posted on that. In terms of what's happening in the whole area of community development, housing, and HOPWA, and those kinds of projects, they are still pretty solid in the Senate. The House, every couple of years, tries to reduce the funding. And usually what happens, the Senate usually prevails. So we'll see, because the whole issue of federal spending, federal domestic spending, and federal military spending is another issue to be decided as part of this budget. So, Mr. Chairman, I'll stop there for federal, then to move on to the state.
Excellent.
Any
questions? Yes, Committee Member Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair and Mr. Ranieri. So I just had a couple of questions the shutdown ended, but in this new sort of 3-week continuing resolution.
Weeks.
But were there any tax cuts in that, hidden in that bill? And if so, what's the impacts of those?
Mr. Chairman, Council Vice President Jenkins, I'm not aware of any tax cuts there. All those tax reductions came earlier in the tax reform bill, and everyone's now is trying to work through the Tax Reform Act and see what it means to, businesses, government right now, those kinds of issues. But I don't remember anything got snuck through in terms of tax cuts. They all were done in December through the so-called Tax Reform Act.
And thank you. And so at this point, we're not fully aware of what the impacts will be on the city and the state, for that
Sure.
matter.
Council President, Mr. Chairman and Council Vice President Jenkins, appropriations are an issue we're concerned about. Federal funding for programs. For example, I think the state is very concerned about any sort of change in so-called mandated programs, and mandated means Social Security payments, Medicare and Medicaid, and that is a big concern for state governments throughout the country, particularly here in Minnesota. At the local level, we are be concerned about transportation funding, housing, community development block grants, and CD and HUD, and they're the ones that we're concerned about. But none of those programs were cut. Those appropriations were cut either in the most recent CR, but there may be some attempts later.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any other committee members, questions on the federal legislation? I also want to recognize we've been joined by Councilmember Warsami. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, the next issue is what's happening at the state. Right now, as you're aware, the governor appointed a task force on affordable housing. I think they're to report back to him sometime this summer. That group has met, beginning to meet. They have all sorts of work groups. Sasha Bergman from our staff will be there tomorrow. We talk about rental housing. She's been to 2 or 3 meetings already. So they have a pretty aggressive work program. They're trying to get some ideas and get it to the governor in the summer, which means there may not be any ideas, anything proposed this session of the legislature, except the governor did, as part of his bonding bill, put in $100 million of appropriation bonds for affordable housing. And he's done that in the past, and hopefully it'll stay. I think he asked for $100 million once before, and one that was 70 or 80 million. But it's a lot of the housing groups all working together will be pushing on that. And that was probably the only local government program that was included in the governor's bonding bill. His proposal for bonding goes back to the future. He basically funded state agencies and university campuses and had he had no local projects. Now, will that stay? You need 60% vote to pass the bonding bill, so I think there will be some additions and changes to the governor's bonding bill. The other things working is there was a meeting this morning, a joint meeting in the Senate on elder abuse. The Star and Tribune ran some articles not too long ago, raised some issues. Both the House and the Senate asked for some studies. The legislative auditor will be out with a report within a month about the system or the lack of system. The Commissioner of Human Services spoke today along with the Acting Commissioner of Health. Some of the concerns now don't directly affect cities, but some of the concerns were maybe we need stronger criminal penalties and civil penalties. And what is the role of the state in supervising and inspecting assisted living and nursing homes and home care? An awful lot of discussion. There will be some recommendations, I think, coming out in the next couple of weeks, and we'll continue to watch those and see if they impact our public health department or just our residents. Another issue is the Commission on Pensions is meeting now, and they have a real interesting agenda today. They have an expert from the University of Minnesota coming in and talking about pension reform and how to do pensions differently. They also have the director of the Oklahoma pension program, and they are beginning to switch from a defined benefit program, which we have in Minnesota, to a defined contribution program. So it should change dramatically now. And then at the same time, the final presentation will be the impact of the Tax Reform Act on pensions. So we have staff, I think Ms. Bergman's there today, checking, making sure we get all the information. Another issue today, or another committee meeting, is the Commission of Metropolitan Council. They're meeting now. They have two issues on their agenda. One is the bidding process for the Southwest Light Rail. And the second is looking at a study that was required on the noise impact of Southwest Light Rail on the Lake Calhoun condo development. And that study, we also have folks covering that. The session is to start on the 20th of February, and they're supposed to need to be done by May 21st. So, Mr. Chairman, I will stand for questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions from committee members? I also wanted to see if you had an update, or if Ms. Siegel has an update on the grand jury convening by the county attorney.
Chair Johnson, that's correct. In a Star Tribune online article, and I think in Minneapolis, Minnesota Public Radio, an online article, that the news has been released that the county attorney has chosen to add to the investigation in the Mohammed Noor, Justine Rushek Damon matter, a grand jury, and apparently has subpoenaed some witnesses to come before a grand jury in that as part of the investigation.
Excellent. Thank you for that update. Any additional questions from committee members? All right. Thank you, Mr. Ranieri. Not seeing any. With that, our meeting is adjourned. Thank you.